ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. partidul s-a născut. Ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut.
Костяк в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжается бой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И он продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 2nd of March, 2026, and here we are with a live stream entitled We Salute the Anti-Imperialist Legacy of Ayatollah Khamenei, the now martyred leader of the Iranian Revolution, and do so because I think the last few days have illustrated comprehensively how erroneous the judgment of Western Marxism has been when it comes to evaluating the legacy of the Iranian Revolution. Now, if we look at the personage of Khamenei and the life that he led, we can see the way in which the contradictions in Iran helped to create the unique set of circumstances that made a revolution that was led by clerics, principally, of course, first amongst them the late Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, the situation in Iran that produced the Iranian Revolution is worth revisiting a little bit because the the way in which this worked out was that the Shah and his regime was, of course, an extremely repressive system, which was calculated to destroy any attempted organization amongst the Iranian proletariat. It, via the Savak, the secret police force, and torturers who were, of course, trained by the CIA, MI6, and Mossad, made a point of going after Iranian revolutionary organizations that were Marxist. And it pushed all oppositional activity into, of course, the form of Shia Islam and into the mosques. And that's part of what shaped the consciousness of the younger Khamenei, who, of course, came of age at the time of the overthrow of Mossadegh, and also then was politicized further by the Shah's so-called White Revolution, which destroyed a lot of traditional land ownership structures in Iran and proletarianized many, many millions of peasants who were turfed off the land and forced into the cities, principally, of course, Tehran. And this combination of things, which is the traditional role of Shia Islam in Iran, the fact that the opposition to the Shah and opposition to Anglo-American really domination over Iran created a certain common cause between those organized around the mosques and those who are of a more secular left-wing disposition to form a revolutionary movement that was very much based on the Iranian proletariat and peasantry, but which found its expression through the channels of religion. And this was aided, of course, by theorists like Ali Shariati, who tried to merge certain aspects of Marxism with Shia Islam. And if you look at the actual political life of Khamenei, he very much summed this up, perhaps even more than Khomeini himself did. Khamenei was, of course, a cleric. He was also the second president of revolutionary Iran. He was tortured in the dungeons of the Savak as a younger man. He was an organizer for the revolutionary movement prior to the revolution in 1979. And if we examine his life as president of Iran throughout that very difficult period when Iran was attacked in a very serious fashion for 8 years by the regime of Saddam Hussein, who, again, I will repeat what I said earlier about Saddam Hussein, which is that, and the Iraqi Baathists, which is that they were no revolutionaries. Yes, life under the Baathists in Iraq was infinitely better than the life that the hell that the Americans created, but that's not exactly a high standard. But the Baathists in Iraq were always the choice of the CIA and the American imperialists, in contrast to the Iraqi communists and the other more revolutionary nationalist figures. But the Iran-Iraq War was again something that was instigated by imperialism, knowing full well that they could rely upon their old agent Saddam Hussein to hurl millions upon millions of Iraqis to their deaths, and in the end, the casualty level for the Iran-Iraq War was over 1 million people. But the Iran-Iraq War was meant to destroy the Iranian Revolution. So for Khamenei to play his part in leading the country through that, with, by the way, as we've said before, the entire Western imperialist bloc plus the Soviet Union was on the side of Ba'athist Iraq in that time. It's another mark of shame against the revisionists. The fact that the Iranian Revolution survived at all is in no small part due to the fact that the masses quite literally hurled themselves into the defense of the revolution. And this is the reason why the revolution survived. For all the fact that the US, the British, the French, the West Germans, and the Soviet Union flooded Ba'athist Iraq with weaponry, and not just in the conventional sense, but in the sense of chemical weapons and biological weapons. If you wonder why Saddam Hussein had any of these things, it was because the imperialists gave them to him to use principally against Iranians. So that was something that was mentioned 23 years ago when Bush was blathering on about Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction. But Donald Rumsfeld, was only confronted with the great picture of him shaking hands with Saddam Hussein once, and he sort of blathered and tried to explain it away. And of course, the interviewer didn't really follow up on it. But the fact is that Saddam Hussein was their creature, and always was. Now, Khamenei, of course, was president at a time when Iran was also engaged in solidarity with other anti-imperialist struggles, such as their solidarity action with the Black Liberation Movement in South Africa. They also carried out some rather expert-level trolling of the British by renaming the street that the British embassy was on in Tehran after the IRA hunger strike of Bobby Sands. Of course, Khamenei had political relationships with people like Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, etc. When later on, when he was in the position of supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution, they built a very strong relationship with Venezuela, and indeed took risks by supplying Venezuela when it was under they were under heavy U.S. sanctions in the late period of the Chavez presidency, which is why it's the mealy-mouthed apologetics done by the latest Venezuelan government refusing to condemn U.S. aggression against Iran was all the more disappointing. But there you go. The Americans, after all, got what they paid for in that case. But the life of Khamenei shows us that one has to truly take a dialectical and historical materialist approach to understanding certain phenomena like the Iranian Revolution, because there you have like a series of, from the point of view of Western Marxism, complete insoluble contradictions, because you have the religious hierarchy of a country leading an anti-imperialist revolution, an anti-imperialist nationalist revolution against US imperialism, rallying the masses to, in the early days anyway, what was presented as a form of Islamic socialism to a certain extent, and then overseeing a national development agenda which made huge social and economic progress for Iran. Now, if you go back and you read all the Marxist analysis, including from Marxist-Leninists in the 80s, the Iranians are just dismissed as like obscurantists, as as dull-eyed religious fanatics. But truth is, Khamenei and people like him were very incredibly learned, very intelligent men. And Khamenei had like read a gigantic amount of like the Western canon of like literature and philosophy. He was he was at least aware of and had clearly read some of the Marxist canon, and consistently put himself behind anti-imperialist movements wherever they popped up, which of course is one of the biggest reasons why the US in the end was so determined to kill him. A fate which I've said before, I think that in the end he embraced, knowing full well the fact that his death would have, politically speaking, as he was, I think, a very smart political operator throughout his life. So in murdering him, all Trump has done is damn himself. And here we'll get into the war itself. Now, I'll start with just what's been going on in terms of the American, and they are mostly American, attacks on Iran. The American attacks on Iran, again, follow a very clear and obvious pattern, which is that, again, it's not about they have been trying to find and eliminate military targets, principally like the missile launchers, but the Iranian missile launchers are mobile, move around a lot, and they're hard for the Americans to track down. But what the Americans seem to be focusing on is, again, it's the same tactics that all of the imperialist countries have always used against countries which defy them, which is using aerial bombardment to terrorize the civilian population, bombing hospitals, bombing schools, killing large numbers of civilians, threatening to, as Trump did, flatten and destroy all of Iran's many great historical monuments, to literally destroy civilization, literally destroy the marks of old Persian civilization, which is what imperialism does. To actually properly indoctrinate a people who have been resisting you, to destroy resistance, you have to destroy their sense of themselves, their sense of historical memory, their sense of belonging to something. They do this, the imperialists do this internally inside their own countries. They do this to the domestic working class. They try and take away the working class's knowledge of itself as a class, because that makes the working class much easier to manage and manipulate. There's just as they try to take away every meaningful thing about Iraqi nationality or Iranian nationality or Armenian nationality, and replace it with what I can only describe as empire auto-generated slop that is served to them by people like, I don't know, Nicole Pashinyan, perhaps. Now, the American tactics are exactly what you would expect. It's exactly what Frantz Fanon wrote about when it came to the French in Algeria. It's exactly what the Americans did to the North Korea, to the Koreans in the Korean War. Mass bombardment, just destroy as much as possible, kill as many people as possible, terrorize the population to the point where they will give up their struggle for independence and to give up their struggle for liberation. Now, that didn't work in huge numbers of wars across the 20th century. I mean, aerial bombardment didn't even work in terms of breaking the fighting ability of the Nazis in World War II. It caused a lot of damage, it killed a lot of people, but it didn't actually shut down military production in Germany. It didn't actually force a surrender in the end. It was the literal conquest of Berlin by the Red Army that did that. The point is that the aerial bombardment doesn't on its own win a war. It can assist in the winning of a war. It can certainly do a lot of damage. It can certainly kill a lot of people, but it doesn't win it, not truly. Which is why the Americans have already lost this war against Iran. They've already lost it because there's no way they can actually win this war in any conventional sense. They knew that the only way they were ever going to be able to carry this off was if the Iranian population revolted against the Islamic Republic, which they're not going to do. And so the Americans are stuck, which is why they're bombing civilians. It's why they're bombing historical sites. It's why they're trying to destroy the essence of Iran as a nation. But they won't be able to do that. Don't get me wrong, though, they will be able to do a lot of damage, but they won't be able to actually conquer Iran in this fashion. Now, Pete Hegseth, the twitchy, pill-popping drunk, who is the American Secretary of War. I mean, Jesus Christ. Talk about not understanding the system that you run. Went and gave a ludicrous press conference today when he talks about how America didn't start the war, despite the fact that his boss, the President of the United States, is on camera literally 2 days ago saying that we are starting military action against Iran. But why should they bother with reality now? It's never troubled them before. But Hegseth looked rattled. He looked like a man who'd been pulled out of a club at 2 a.m, told to get back to the White House and present himself. Trump gave a sort of rambling justification for himself, saying that he was not worried. We can go for a long time. Oh, we're tough. But in truth, that the Iranians have so far played this game very well, which is that they know the Americans have a limited amount of ammunition. The Americans, by the way, for all their pretense at bombing Iran, have not been flying aircraft, it would seem, over Iran itself. They've been flying drones, which have been getting shot down. But American aircraft have been hovering outside of Iranian airspace and firing standoff munitions into Iran. And the American Navy's been firing a lot of Tomahawk missiles at Iran, but the Americans haven't been able to actually fly their aircraft inside Iran. The Iranian Air Force is still in the skies above Iran. In fact, the Iranian Air Force has made sorties out of Iran to bomb American bases in Iraq. So let's not be fooled by the attempts to claim dominance that Hegseth and others have been making. They've been lobbing missiles into Iran from as far away as possible, and this isn't something which is going to work. This only worked, in inverted commas, in the situation that arose in the former Yugoslavia in Kosovo, literally because they managed to get the Milosevic-led government to capitulate because the Yeltsin regime stabbed them in the back and basically says, we won't support you through the winter, we won't supply you with any oil, you'll freeze to death, basically, as the Americans will eliminate your power grid. That's why they, quote unquote, won that war. They won it by trickery and capitulation. I doubt any such thing will be forthcoming from Iran. In fact, the big question is, well, how long can the Americans sustain any of this? The Gulf Arab regimes are already whining and complaining that they're running out of air defense missiles already, that the Americans are refusing to supply them with any more because the Americans don't have many more to supply them with, and they'll want to hoard them for their own purposes. And that's the problem that the Americans face here, which is that for all of the destruction that they can cause, it's limited in time. And this goes back like 20 years in terms of like the redesigning of the American military by Donald Rumsfeld to reflect the fact that they were going to fight wars where they hoped nobody would shoot back, basically. Now they're very much in a shooting war. They don't know what to do. I mean, Pete Hegseth made a ludicrous claim that they were ready to, launch action on the ground in Iran, which is, again, a complete impossibility at this stage. In fact, it would be a complete impossibility at almost any stage. Like the Americans simply don't have the men to put on the ground, and what they might try and push the Gulf Arab regimes into providing a fighting force for them. But who does that consist of? The Saudis? The Saudi army is terrible. Like, it's used purely for internal repression. When they tried to launch ground invasions of the part of Yemen controlled by Ansar Allah over the last decade, the Saudis got beaten over and over and over again and repeatedly humiliated on the ground. And again, they couldn't win a war just using air power against Ansar Allah over the last decade, despite starvation-level blockades. So none of this worked, basically. And so the Saudis have a navy, of course, but again, the usage of that will be quite limited. And again, this navy's not been particularly battle tested, and there's no guarantee that it'll be any good when you try and put it into action. And the Saudis themselves, despite the talk of the Saudis declaring war on Iran, that hasn't actually happened yet. There was an attack on the Saudi Aramco facility, but more and more it looks as if that was something that was done by the Israelis or the Americans in order to push the Saudis into declaring war openly. But I think that would be, if the Saudis ended up doing that, it would be completely suicidal for the House of Saud to do such a thing. I mean, most of the Saudi army that does exist is, judging from what I saw in the pictures that came out of Yemen, where it consisted of like soldiers and that they bought in from like Sudan and places like that, that were doing the actual fighting, and they collapsed pretty quickly when faced with the Yemenis. So this is a situation where the American plan, having gone completely wrong, which it was always going to, the killing of Khamenei was never going to collapse the government and the state of the Islamic Republic, and therefore they are now stuck and can't go forward, can't go backwards. And this leads us to turn to what the Iranians have been doing, which is that they've been continuing their assaults on American bases and the American supply chain across the region. They've continued to drop missiles into the Israeli onto the Israeli regime. They missed, it would seem, unless he's been AI generated now, Netanyahu. There was an attempt by the IRGC to assassinate him, but it seems that they got some people who were close to him, but not Netanyahu himself. He looked ashen-faced and haunted when visiting the crater that could have been his grave. So there's that to take succor from, at least. But again, according to even reports coming out of the Israeli regime itself, they also don't have enough air defense interceptors. They also are going to be running short on missiles pretty soon. So the question of like, well, how sustainable is this comes up. And it seems to me, unless something dramatically changes, that the US side is going to run out of ammunition, the requisite ammunition needed for their ships and their aircraft far before the Iranians are. And then the question remains, well, what do they do then? Which raises some interesting questions about like, well, what role does China play in all of this? What role do the Russians play in all of this? And it's fairly clear that the Chinese have essentially been playing a very significant role in providing like intelligence and certain other forms of support to the Iranians to enable them to do more precise targeting. The Russians have also, of course, been providing certain elements of military equipment to the Iranians. And now what's been revealed from all of this is something which is very, very important to both Russia and China, which is just how weak American military power actually is. If you look at like what the American domination of West Asia is really based on, it's not based on a giant amount of men. Like the total number of Americans in situ around Iran is no more than 50,000. It's no more than 50,000 men, and that's not enough to like launch any form of direct on-the-ground aggression against Iran. It's barely even enough to like hold on to what they've got. So like the American domination of this region, or indeed any region, is not based on huge numbers of men being deployed. Just as, by the way, the British domination of like the area previously wasn't based on large numbers of men. It was based on naval assets, later on based on having aircraft stationed there. And it was based on having reliable comprador stooges to do the work for you, which is, again, the Americans have just completely taken over these networks that were established by the British. They've taken over the running of the Zionist network. They've taken over the relationship with the wretched Hashemites of Jordan, the Gulf tyrannies, the House of Saud, etc. And it's that which has been the basis for American dominance, not not like sheer weight of military power, not like unstoppable military force, because they never had that. They never had that, and this is something which is very important to think about, to consider. The illusion of like American military omnipotence is just an illusion. It's like it's something which has been manufactured over the years. They weren't the ones that won World War II. Of course, that was the Soviet Union and the Chinese. They were there, but very much in a supporting role, if that. They were unable to win when they attempted to directly fight seriously well-organized armies of national liberation in the 20th century. What their speciality is, following on again from the British, is terrorizing civilian populations, mass death squad work, intelligence operations, paying people off, the kind of cynical manipulations, basically. And their modern day dominance is based on being the power that sets the rules of trade and the currency of trade for the entire world. That's where it all came from, and it's never been military dominance, and the economic dominance that the illusions of American power comes from. There was a time when the US was really the most powerful economy in the world in terms of an industrialized power, which is probably lasted from about like I'm going to make a rough guess, from the late 19th century post-American Civil War through to like the middle 60s. So that's like 70 to 80, possibly like 90 odd. No, let's call it 90 odd years as the preeminent capitalist industrial power in the world. But it starts falling away very rapidly after like the middle 1960s, in terms of the curse of imperialism kicks in, deindustrialization kicks in. The system moves over just to being one of mass export of capital rather than commodities. But as always, these things have a long lag, because the US was this dominant industrial economy for such a long period of time, for like almost a century. That created the American culture industry, which has been part of like maintaining the illusion of American power for a very long time. And let's go back to what we're talking about here, which is how the war is proceeding. The war is proceeding exactly as anybody who has seriously analyzed the American power knows it was always going to proceed, which is that, again, American power itself is far from unbeatable. It's eminently beatable. It always has been. But again, it takes a certain amount of organization to be able to pull off a victory over it. You need a certain amount of organization, strength amongst the masses, in order to stand up to what any imperial power will unleash on you, which is mass, indiscriminate murder if you oppose them. Doesn't matter which imperial power it is: Germans, French, Italians, British, especially the British, and back in the day, the Spanish and the Portuguese. They always react in the same way, and they always wage their wars in the same way. And so therefore this war is going to be no different. But it's a war the Iranians can ultimately win. It's a war the Iranians can ultimately win, not by marching into Washington and raising the flag of the Islamic Republic over the Capitol building, although I'm sure there would actually be quite a number of Americans who would probably welcome that act of liberation. But by actually just surviving, by defying the US, by fighting this war and pushing particularly like the Israeli regime to the point of collapse, by targeting its key economic and technical infrastructure and military infrastructure, we can see that the Iranians can win a victory, because ultimately the US will be forced to back down. Now, there are some that say, the US will turn to nukes. I don't think so. First of all, there's a big question of whether if any American president presses the big red button, that anything will happen. Then, as I said before, I think there's a very significant question about whether the Russians and the Chinese will tolerate that kind of like flagrant nuclear terrorism, because both have to know that if they'll do it to Iran, eventually they'll try and do it to one of them, maybe through plausibly deniable routes. But again, if you let the Americans get away with that, it's suicidal for Russia and China. So the likely outcome is, in my view, that the war will run for a number of months. It'll run to at least until the Americans run out of munitions, and then we'll see what happens. I think there will be efforts by the Chinese and the Russians to bring some sort of negotiated settlement in. But unless Iran's fundamental demands are addressed, then there won't be a negotiated settlement. That's the thing. It's a question of whether Iran is able to obtain its objectives. And its objectives are to not just lash out and get revenge for the death of Ayatollah Khamenei, but to remove the American threat to Iran. and it is purely, it's an American threat to Iran. Let's not make any mistake here. That the idea pushed by some very foolish people that this is it's all Benjamin Netanyahu's invention. This is nonsense. This is nonsense. Yes, Netanyahu represents a certain militarist and fascist clique inside the American ruling class and state machine, and that gives him a certain amount of power and influence. That's true. But this is an American war. It's like the American soldiers who die in this war, they're not dying for Israel. That might sound good from a propaganda point of view, but they're dying for the American ruling class. They're dying for Wall Street. They're dying for the American-led global system, which is what this is really all about. And I'll go back to repeating myself again, but like this war in Iran has gone through different phases for the last 47 years. The American imperialists require Iran to be returned to their system, to be subjugated, to be turned into a site of pure resource extraction and nothing else, for its economy to be destroyed, for its technological capacity to be eroded and asset stripped, for its people to be enslaved, for their sense of themselves to be destroyed. All of that is required to return Iran to a subjugated state. And that's an American requirement. It's a British requirement as well, by the way, and a French and a German one. And in fact, all of the imperialists completely agree that Iran should be returned to a subjugated state. But it's an American war. Like Israel plays its role as like the fascistic outrider here, but it's a war dictated by the interests of the American ruling class. And that's why, of course, the two parties of the American oligarchy are completely on board with it. They're completely on board with it because they know, or at least the more sentient of them know, that this is something which is crucial for the American ruling class. And without that, without the ability to beat and loot Iran, then the American system is going to plunge into greater levels of problems. And this again brings up the link to both the American attempt to stage some kind of provocation against the Chinese and the American attempt to bog down the Russians in a forever war that they will not be able to get out of in Ukraine, which is basically what the tactic is in Ukraine. And also, before I go any further, this idea that Trump was forced to go to war and he didn't want to, this is nonsense. This is complete rubbish. Go back and look at like all of Trump's statements, going back all the way to 2015, when like he would talk about that he was opposed to forever wars. What does that mean? Well, it means he wants quick wars. Which American president doesn't? He says, "Oh, why are we occupying Iraq? We should just take the oil and go." We said, "Well, yeah, you can't take all of the oil at once, can you, Donald?" But the point about Trump's supposed opposition to wars was this was always just rhetorical. Like George W. Bush was opposed to regime change wars. Remember that? Plenty of American presidents, realizing that these wars aren't popular with the voters, make rhetorical noises against them. So did Barack Obama. And he waged more wars and dropped more bombs than George W. Bush. Because it doesn't matter what they say. They are presented with the needs of the system when they get into office, and they can either defy that and risk getting Kennedy'd or at least Nixon'd, or they go along with it. Trump's no different. And Trump has always been in love with American power and militarism. He always has been. Like even in his supposed like big confrontation with Jeb Bush, it was like mainly just everybody enjoyed him basically calling Jeb Bush a cuck and a moron. But it was basically about the fact that like the Republican challengers back in 2016 weren't actually aggressive and militarist enough. And Trump would be more aggressive and militaristic, and he would go harder and faster, and therefore he would win. That was what his campaign was based on in 2016. And from that point, from all the way through his first administration, like what the American system was doing was to trying to essentially make a decision over whether they were going to go after the Russians or the Chinese first. And they decided ultimately they were going to try and go after the Russians first. That didn't work. So now they are finding themselves restricted with regard to what they can do. But let's make no mistake about it. Trump was always a militarist. Trump was always going to pursue like aggressive interventionist wars. He just claimed that he would be able to do them smarter than Obama or George W. Bush could. So this is nonsense. The idea pushed by so many that he was ever seriously opposed to American interventionism. He just said he was going to do it better. And he said he was going to spend more on the military than anybody else. Well, of course, that's no vain boast, because like every American president since the days of Herbert Hoover has ended up spending more on the military than the previous president. So not exactly a huge achievement there. But the point about this is that the idea, again, pushed by some former Marxists, it must be said, that Trump was going to find a space for America in the multipolar world, and everyone was going to join hands and sing the fucking song from the old Coca-Cola advert. Again, what was the evidence for that? Other than like, Trump, when he came in, like unleashed Doge and basically just reorganized the NED and the US aid out of like basically just doing some sort of petty bureaucratic squabble. And reorganized it to be more to his tastes. But he didn't end any of it. He didn't dismantle the regime change apparatus. How could he? Even if he wanted to. But he never wanted to. That's the thing. Like, Trump has always been a rabid enthusiast for American imperialism. He just thinks that he can run it better if he obtains the victories quicker and easier than the previous presidents. That's why he was so attracted to the idea of seizing Maduro. That's why the idea of assassinating Soleimani appealed to him. Why the idea of assassinating Ayatollah Khamenei appealed to him. It's like he thinks he can get these like quick victories that any American president would want, but some of them in the past have been less eager to do things which are so sort of egregious in terms of aggression. But then again, look back at Obama. Obama oversaw the execution of Gaddafi live on camera. So how is Trump much different to Obama? And how is Obama much different to Trump? This is the image of Trump, carefully managed image, of course, and the reality of Trump is something that so many multipolar grifters spent so long trying to sell you the image of Trump as the multipolar enjoyer. Was never the case. Was never the case. This was as to whether this war would have been waged by Biden or Harris. It's an interesting question. I think this there was always this war against Iran was always going to happen in one form or another. It's just because Trump is particularly crude and particularly thuggish. He has chosen to go about it in the stupidest and most ridiculous way possible, which ultimately will further the crises within American imperialism. Now, the Democrats, in many ways, are the more dangerous opponent than Trump, which is that they actually understand the American system a little better than he does, and I would say that they are more dangerous opponents because they come up with things like the old JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Now, that was actually the much more effective tool for regime change in Iran than anything Trump's come up with, because that showed in its construction that the people who designed that had actually looked at the contradictions in Iran and were aware of them and knew and had an idea of how to exploit them. Funnily enough, Trump, by pandering to the Republican reaction, extreme right wing, destroyed what was probably their best chance of actually eroding the anti-imperialist content of the Islamic Republic, because they did away with something that was meant to have an overt appeal and to bolster the position of the Iranian comprador bourgeoisie. But there you go. The war, to bring this to a conclusion for tonight. By the way, check out the earlier episode of Decline and Fall, because a lot of interesting stuff in that one. More stuff from Decline and Fall later this week. But to bring things to a conclusion for tonight, I would say that the first few days of this war has shown that it's exposed the utter hollowness of American imperialism. It's like it is no longer really able to keep itself in the Gulf region. And ultimately, they've already had to retreat from their positions in the UAE. There's infamous footage now of the US literally flying their forces out of there. I doubt that they will return in the same way. They're now like crowding their aircraft onto Cyprus, apparently, which again is further and further away from Iran. If you look at that on the map, that's that's like, I think it must be over 1,000 miles to fly there and back to Iran from Cyprus, probably more. So their position to in terms of their ability to strike Iran is getting more and more difficult, and they have no ability to put a serious ground force in. The best they'll be able to do is to try and get the Kurdish or Balochi separatists to stage some sort of uprising, but I imagine that the Iranians can deal with that with relative ease. So this is ultimately going to be a messy and a long war, because the US imperialists won't just accept defeat, but it's a war that has already exposed that they are unable to continue their domination of the region. They were only able to continue it as long as they have because they had cringing servant regimes run by compradors in many of the Arab states. And just before I sign off for tonight, it's worth keeping an eye on the situation in Lebanon, because there you have the clowns in the Lebanese government threatening to demilitarize Hezbollah, which is, well, first of all, good luck with that. Second of all, it's also worth noting that the Lebanese government has no independent existence. It's controlled almost entirely by the US, the British, the French, and the Israelis. So if they're making that threat to essentially restart the Lebanese civil war, then essentially we should conclude from that the imperialists themselves would be happy with the restart of the Lebanese civil war, because that would give them that would essentially that they would see it as neutralizing Hezbollah by bogging it down in a war in its own country. They may come to regret that, because I think that any civil war in Lebanon would be something that ultimately Hezbollah would win. Anyway, I'll bring things to a conclusion for tonight. I'll be back again with you tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in. And I will say thank you to all those who support the show on Patreon and buy me a coffee. More stuff coming up on Patreon later this week. Thank you for joining me tonight. Good night and solidarity.